Welcome. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm your host today, Dr. Francesca Fujimi. I'm the CEO of MFE Corp and the founder of Your Black Matters. It's an organization dedicated to finding solutions to the issues faced by the Black race. Let me share a little clip with you. I'm a Black female finance executive with 3 decades of work experience in corporate America. I was challenged to create a platform where all people will have the opportunity to understand, influence, and advance Black matters. I was initially fearful about the proposition because of the possibility of a backlash or losing my position in corporate if I speak up. But my son reminded me that it will be a very small price to pay, even if it happened.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Fujimi.
So I would ask you what advice you can give me, because I know you're well versed on the continent, is what would be my next step to learn more about doing business in Africa?
You know, that's a fantastic question, but the best thing you can do is visit. Let me introduce you to Black Mystery. This is Black groups' dynamics and perceptions of white people. I wrote this after the George Floyd and the January 6th storming of the Capitol events that took place in the United States. Many people are on the same page regarding mainstream perceptions of Black people. The series of events that started with the pandemic, George Floyd, global protest, police brutality, BLM, Proud Boys, and the January 6th storming of the Capitol enlightened us to view our systems differently. Black Mystery presents an opportunity behind the scenes to hear directly from the source, Black people. The question of revenge surfaced. That is, if Black people have the opportunity to take revenge for what they had experienced, would they want to? The responses were specific. They included solutions to the systemic problems faced by Blacks. Readers have confirmed that the answers to the questions we have been wrestling with lies in Black Mystery. Enjoy it. All right, so that was all about me. So thank you for watching that. Okay, so what I would like us to do is really to start with National Anthem. As you know, in the Black community here in the US, we have Lift Every Voice. So we must start with that.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the glistening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing a rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on.
me chills every time. I mean, unfailingly. Whew, okay, our next speaker is Jacob Umofe Gordon, Emeritus Professor, University of Kansas, Kwame Nkrumah Endowed Chair, University of Ghana, Senior Fulbright Scholar. Jake was born in Nigeria and came to the United States on a scholarship to attend Bethune-Cookman College, graduating with a Bachelor Honors in History, Masters of Arts in History, Howard University, and Ph.D. in History. At University of Southern California, he completed a postdoctoral studies with Kaufman Fellow in Gerontology. At the University of Kansas, he was founding chair of the Department of African and African American Studies in 1970. He was the first Black professor awarded the distinction of Professor Emeritus from the University of Kansas. For more than 50 years in higher education, he has been devoted to research, teaching, and service in African studies and the Black experience in the diaspora. He is author or co-author of 30 books, the latest of which is The Selected Works of an African Scholar in the Diaspora, a retrospective analysis in 2021, and African American Studies, 50 Years at the University of Florida, 2022. Dr. Gordon is the recipient of many awards, most recently the International Education Partnership Award from KU and the Outstanding Alumni Award, Bethune-Cookman University, both in 2019. He has traveled throughout Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, South and North Americas. He serves as historian of the BCU National Alumni Association, founding member of the African Studies Association of Africa, International Bullying Prevention Association Board of Directors, Advisory Board of the African American Studies Program at the University of Florida, External Doctoral Examiner for the University of Cape Town, South Africa, President of the Alachua County African and African American Historical Society, Incorporated, Chair of the Alachua County African American History Task Force, President of United Nations Association Gainesville Chapter. He's married to Dr. Barbara McDade Gordon, Professor Emerita, University of Florida. They share 6 children and 3 grandchildren. Welcome, Prof. Prof is going to talk to us about the history of Black History Month.
Thank you so much. This is very great. I want to thank all the panelists. You've taught me a lot of things and you have inspired me. I think this is fantastic. Femi asked a good question. What I want to present is about that question. Everybody knows that the human race started in Africa. So what has happened? Why are we still talking about race? Why are we not just human beings? These were the challenges that actually made Kadaji Woodson to get into the study of the Black race. But before I get into Kadaji Woodson as the father of Black history, I want to dedicate my remarks to 2 pioneers in this area. The first is Phyllis Whitney. Phyllis Whitney was born in 1753 and died in 1784. She was kidnapped from West Africa, we don't know exactly where, when she was only 8 years old. I was brought to America. In Virginia, she was purchased by John Whitney. John bought her to be a servant to his wife, Susanna. Whitley was sickly, but very lovely when she was sold to John. They named her, we don't know what her original name is, but she was named Phyllis, and that was the name of the ship that brought her into slavery. And she was called Whitney because that is the last name of who bought her. So she became Phyllis Whitney. The point I'm trying to make here is that Phyllis Whitney was taught how to read in Boston area by the daughter of her master. Her name was Mary. In 1768, she wrote a book which was never published. The title is On Being Brought from Africa to America. That was in 1768. In 1773, she wrote a book of poetry entitled Poems of Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. In 1773, before the Revolutionary War, she became the first person of African descent to ever publish a book in this part of the world. Now, she was also one of the first 3 women in colonial American history to ever publish a book. So I do want to dedicate my presentation to her. The second person I want to dedicate to is Ekwano. His first name was Oladwa Ekwano, or sometimes he's referred to as Vasa's Vasa. That was the name given to him by someone who bought him. Ekwano was born in Ebwa, which is now Nigeria, in 1745 and lived until he was about only 52 years old when he passed in 1797. Ekwano wrote the first person of African-American descent to also publish his own narrative story, just like people who spoke earlier on were telling their own story. And it was called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oladwa Ekwano, or Vatusi Vasa, the African. And this book was published in 1789. Ekwano was actually known as a great traveler. He was sold to captain of different ships. He traveled everywhere, from Asia back to Africa, first to the Caribbean, and landed in the United States, was bought finally by a Quaker in Philadelphia. So those were 2 pioneers, even before Karadzi's Woodson I'm about to talk about. I want to begin by giving you one quote, and that is, you see it on the screen. Woodson says, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history." All the problems we're talking about today, he saw that. I want to talk about his early years. He was born December 1775. His parents were very poor in Virginia. He worked in coal mine to get some money. He wanted to go to school. He was so inspired. He was the 4th of 9 children that were born in slavery. He collected money and he worked very hard in a coal mine. And he did not go to school until he was 20 years old. And the only school he could go to was an all-black school, of course, at that time. So he went to what he called Frederick Douglass High School, where he finished in 1886. Woodson was known to have been very committed to education as the only way out to become somebody. In 1885, he went to one of the few colleges, Christian College, Viera in Kentucky, where he finished a bachelor's degree. You see the motto of that school there? He said, God had made of one blood all nations of men. That's what Fumi was talking about. And we are made of one blood, all nations of just men. We're talking about men there. So he finished his degree, Bachelor of Literature at Beara College. Then he left there. He went straight, tried to get into University of Chicago. He was told his credentials were not too good, so we have to enroll you into undergraduate. So he did, and he got his BA degree and his master's degree from the University of Chicago. Karaji Woodson worked again, saved some money, borrowed some money, and decided to go to Harvard. He wanted a degree in history. In 1912, he received his Ph.D. in history from Harvard. He became the second Black human being that ever received a Ph.D. from Harvard. The first one being W.E.B. Du Bois in 1895. So after this degree, he embarked on travel. He went to different places. And you can see the picture there. In 1915, he dreamed that we need to do something about preserving the Black history. And so he established the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Of course, the word Negro has changed. Here, let me suggest for your consideration. People who came to this country by forced migration have been given at least 5 different names. First, they were called Africans. They were called colored people. They were called African Americans, Afro-Americans, and Black, at least 6. So it's not surprising that at the time Karaji Woodson grew up, the name for Black folks who came from Africa was Negro. So he called it the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Of course, you find out later on that will change later. You see the picture there was a committee meeting of people who were organized. And I was looking for the picture of another great woman, Mary McLeod Bethune, who founded Bethune-Cookman College, where I went to school in 1904. She became the first woman in this organization to become president. In 1936, she was president, and actually she was president for the longest time than anybody else. She was president in 1936 until 1951. In 1916, after establishing the organization, Karaji Woodson has no way of disseminating information about Black people. And so he decided, let's create our own journal, our own academic journal. So in 1916, he created the Journal of Negro History, which has also been changed into the Journal of African American History. The chronology goes on. In 1921, he couldn't publish anything, and so he decided he was going to create a press so that Black folks who are doing research can publish their works. So in 1921, he founded the Associated Publishers to publish things about Black people. Because at that time, the white press would not touch anything. In 1922, he decided to buy a house. And that house, the address is there in Washington, D.C., 1538 on 9th Street, Northwest Washington. I know that place very well. And at the same time, this house, he was staying downstairs, upstairs. Downstairs was the headquarters of the association that he had just created, which is now, it had become now a historical site in Washington, D.C. You see the next picture there, and that is the headquarters, as I indicated. There are people who raise the question often. There's also a marker, historical marker, memorial, for Karaji Woodson to honor him. You see that marker there? Here's the issue. In 1926, Karaji Woodson said, I've done all of this. So we're going to do one more thing. Let's set up one day, at least 1 week, he said, aside, to really have an exhibit, a display of all the research we have done for the past 11 and a half months, so that people can come and see the accomplishment of Black people, contrary to what a lot of European philosophers like A. Newton in 1923, he said, Black folks, they are not human beings. Okay? They're just not human beings. They can't accomplish anything. They are born to be slaves. And there was no history of Africa. The only history of Africa is the European presence in Africa. Now, this man was professor of King's College, a Rhodes Scholar professor of King's College, when he was writing this in Europe. There are many other European scholars, like philosophers, Hegel, all them, were all writing the how inferior Black people were. That was, in fact, the genesis of race that we talked about today. They painted the picture of Black people to be inhumane. They were barbarians, they were not human beings. So in 2026, Carter said, let's create 1 week at least. This is when he launched it. It was called Black History Week. And he sat down as a historian and he was thinking, what week are we going to have? 2 things came to his mind. He looked at American history. He said, the person who really helped Black folks to become free in this country was Abraham Lincoln. When he became president of the United States, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 that set Black people free. And Abraham Lincoln was born in the month of February. In fact, February 12th, he was born. Then he looked around and said, who were other people who helped Black folks to be free? And the only one he can think about, and rightly so, was Frederick Douglass. He was one of the greatest abolitionists. He said, when was he born? February 14. He said, okay, let's have it that 2nd week and celebrate 1 week of Black history. So that was the genesis of Black history celebration in 1926. And that was his thinking by February. He wasn't saying, don't do Black history any other time. He was just saying, on this day, we are going to show to white people what we have accomplished as a race. And in doing so, they are most likely going to respect us as human beings. In 1970, the celebration of Black History Month actually spread into other parts of the country. Since 1926, other things happened. We decided to change Black History Month, a day, week, into Black History Month to cover the whole month of February. That was in 1970. There was a great debate in his own association that he established. The Association for the Study is still the best academy if you want to know anything about Black folks. Still on today. And so we've been celebrating it since then for a whole month, 1970. And 1976, it was made official. Woodson was not only just a scholar. He wrote, for example, Education of the Negro prior to 1861, A Century of Migration, History of the Negro Church. But one thing you want to know about Woodson is that he went to all Black organizations, and his church was the most important organization that Black folks had after Richard Allen established it, the AME, the African Methodist Episcopal, the very first Black church in this country. And so he studied the Black church, he studied the Black clubs and Black organizations all over to really collect information about the Black experience. And then in 1933, he decided to reflect on his experiences. He went to all white universities from university, then he went to Harvard, he got a PhD at Harvard, and he said to myself, what kind of miseducation do we have? I went to a university, got a PhD, second to get a PhD in history, and yet didn't know anything about himself and where he came from. And he decided, see, that's really miseducation of the Negro. So that book was published in 1933. The African background, this man, he did not just stay in America, he traveled Africa. This is one scholar I know, traveled Africa. All the European scholars were talking about Africa, never stepped 1 foot in Africa. This guy traveled to Africa and he saw things with his own naked eyes. And he came back and wrote another one, African Heroes and Heroines. That is a wonderful book that I recommend to anyone to read. It's very good. And so we look at Kadaji Woodson, not just as a scholar, look at all the books I've published, to recommend, to suggest that Black folks have done something in human experience, and we need to document it. Now, another great scholar in this context is George James. from Guyana, who published a book in 1954 before he died. And the title of the book is called Stolen Legacy. James was focusing on how Europeans stole African ideas. For example, the so-called Greek philosophy. There was nothing Greek about that philosophy. It came from ancient Egypt. And so Black history, African history, whatever title you want to call it, they have been stolen, they have been destroyed, and they have been distorted. And that challenge that faced Karaji Woodson in his period continues to face us today. He was not just a historian, he mentored a number of scholars. He was an author, he was a teacher, he taught in elementary school, he taught in secondary school, he taught in university, he became academic dean, and he was a journalist. A lot of the people he mentored was people like John Hope Franklin, who wrote this book, From Slavery to Freedom, and a great number of other scholars who look up to this guy. If you go to Howard today, you see a building named after him. And if you go to Washington, D.C., you will see all materials after him. And so we have always looked at Karaji Woodson, Kara Godwin Woodson, as the father of Black history. Let me pause here also to suggest that post-colonial Africa, Africans have also produced a number of great historians that we must understand are facing the same problem that Karaji Woodson faced. The decolonization of African history, the reconstruction of African history, works done by, for example, by Kenneth Dike from Ibadan. He was one of those people who organized the first conference about African studies in Ghana in 1958, I think. Dike, Ade Ajayi, Adu Bohan from Ghana, Kwame, not Nkrumah, but Kwame Ahim, and the list goes on. Great writers, Senghor, Amy Césaire, the list goes on. They are all trying to recapture, to reconstruct African history. That in fact, that's what happened. It was that reading, that study that I did, that I understand all of these people, that actually inspired me to write my latest book entitled Africa and the African Diaspora in the Development of the Global North, the American Story. It came out just last year. And so with that, I will stop and take questions. That is short history I can give you about the development of what we now call Black History Month, or Black African American Month. Let me also mention the emergence of Black studies in the 1960s have also helped us to promote the study of Africa and the African diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you so much for what you've shared with us, Prof. What I would like to do now, I'm going to spotlight all our speakers, and we are going to ask questions across the board. Simisola, do you want to go ahead with your question? Then we go with Femi and just indicate who the question is directed to. You can direct your question to any of our speakers that are here on the screen. Please go ahead, Simi.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Prof, for that excellent presentation and calling to my attention that that's very productive scholar and African-American historian. I would like you to speak on how the works of these forerunners of African-American liberation trying to reclaim African-American history, how their work and their efforts intersect with African historians and leaders, especially from the period of decolonization on Africa. So maybe from the 60s upwards. And I have two people in mind specifically in the Anglophone Africa, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah and Zeke Nnamdi Azikiwe, and in the Francophone Africa, the movement of negritude, which has been heavily criticized. So is there a synergy, deliberate or unconscious, that the synergy between these continental heroes and African American heroes in rehabilitating the Black story?
Yes, they are, but the challenge is so big. We did not have Association of African Studies until 2014, when I was in Ghana. Everybody comes to America because we have what we call ASA, Association of African Studies. It's in this country. It's in Europe. And so that people want to study Africa, they have to come to America or go to Europe. It makes no sense. So when I was in Climate professor, that was one thing I worked on, to create Association for the African Studies in Africa. And we had the first conference at Ibadan in 2015. Now, but there are still a lot of challenges. There's a problem of decolonization, and Nkrumah talked about that. A lot of African scholars still glorify European American scholars. Okay? Even our school curriculum, our university curriculum, we still have not been able to break away from UK. And the list goes on. And there are a lot of other scholars. In fact, I have a project I'm working on right now. I want to have conversations with African historians to see where they want to go. There's going to be a conference in November in Ghana, sponsored by Germans, about African archives. Now, I was lucky to travel around the whole of Africa, from Morocco to South Africa, everywhere. The preservation of African historical materials is awful. Very, very bad. Now, here in America, we now finally have the Museum of African American History over there in Washington, D.C. If you have time, visit it. That has taken almost 100 years to work on that one. But it's there. If we don't preserve our history, who's going to preserve our history? Oral history is critical. We have that. Who's recording the oral history? So a lot of our history, not only stolen and destroyed, they are not being cared for. If you go to a typical archive in Africa, you may not be able to read the material there if they're published in, let's say, 15th century. It's faded. Go to Accra and look at what's there. You can't read it. So the preservation of that document has been my greatest challenge. But there are communications. We are working together, the diaspora historians and also those in Africa. So it's a long answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Really appreciate that. And, you know, it actually brought me to some of what Albert Lord was talking about, the legacy of African American from 2006 to 2020. We need to start supporting that. We need to go there. We need to begin to pull those things together, because we may not be able to recreate all these things, but at least whatever is there, let's promote it, let's support it, and let's begin to disseminate it. Bring kids from Africa to be able to see those things, and vice versa. I see other hands. I see Studio Duzo. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and go ahead.
I just wanted to just to add on Prof. Gordon. I don't know if ever you're aware of the Thabo Mbeki's Presidential Library in Pretoria. I think it's under University of South Africa, where they've already started the archiving all African scholars and African histories in that. I think probably if you can connect with them as well, that could really, really help. I know recently they've been taking some of the writing materials and scholarly materials from Britain, that was by, I think, Kwame Nkrumah, and all his written stuff then have been sent to South Africa for archival. So there's that process of now gathering African history and African diaspora into one area where scholars can go and have them under one central point. So I think that could at least, I hope that will be beneficial as well to your program of trying to gather scholars, historians to at least cover this story about Africa.
Thank you so much for bringing that.
Thank you.
One other thing, it's my thought that as much as we have so much a rich history, and we've been also discussing a lot of things about Africa and African diaspora history. I think it's we are coming to a point whereby we have to now transition from just mere discussion to create think tanks that will definitely reach chart our direction. Because right now we are rich in terms of experience, everything that we've already gone through. But now we need now to create some think tanks that will influence governments, that will influence policy, that will influence, because if without having that power to influence, we would not, we'll just keep on discussing, but we must now push our politicians, push corporations, the economies, that they must serve the African agenda. Other than that, we'll just be talking and leaving the experiences without impacting exactly what we need to do. That's my thought for now. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the comment. I know we have 3 minutes more. What I would like to do is to give our speakers just 1 minute final thoughts that they would like to share with us. Prof, you just finished. Maybe you want to start.
I'm looking for the future. I think the Black History Celebration in America has serious implications for Africa. So what I'm trying to do is to see whether we can organize a Pan-African historical society, because in Africa, every little country has its own historical society, and they are really not too viable. I know what's going on in Pretoria. I was in Morocco. They have one of the best museums and archives in Africa. So my future is looking towards a Pan-African historical society. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, let me go to Mr. Lord. We're going to wrap up with Ms. DuPont Walker, but I'm going to go to Mr. Lord first.
First of all, thank you so very much. I have learned a lot. More importantly, like any researcher or investigator, I have now contacts. If I could share or have access to the speakers to talk about how the work that I'm doing with the African American Heritage Legacy Project can do a more in-depth review of Dr. Woodson, that's happy to do that, and opening up. And just keep in mind that I'm working on a virtual exhibit to allow everybody with access to a computer, a cell phone, to have information, as opposed to having to physically get up and have a presence. So I applaud each and every one of you for having done the work and the work that you're going to do, and all blessings for being included. Thank you so very much.
Oh my, thank you so much, Mr. Lord. And if you want, we'll definitely disseminate some of those contacts so that the work must continue. Thank you. Ms. DuPont Walker?
Thank you, Dr. Francesca. I see in the selectors that God led you to a link, and I hope it does not end. Dr. Jacob, you have the ability to connect the African diaspora in a way that we have not, and Mr. Lord as a way to help put your work on the map, and I commit to be the arms and legs in the grass.
Thank you.
Woo, hallelujah. Oh, I'm sorry. This is
hallelujah. No, don't be sorry.
This is fantastic. This is fantastic. Thank you so very much. I absolutely know that this is not the end, it's just the beginning. And I want to appreciate you for coming together and supporting us today to make this a great success. Thank you. Really.
And thank you for making it happen, Francisca. I really appreciate it.